Hello, this is Mike with Trike with Mike, Texas. I'm not riding my trike today, but I am out at sea. So this is the Atlantic, somewhere between the Azores and Spain. It's a way to travel. We've had great weather. A little cloudy today. Looks like there's some storms in the distance, but the water has just been absolutely calm. So, as most of you know by now, I was a veteran of the U.S. Navy. Was on a submarine, William H. Bates. It's a fast attack nuclear powered submarine. I was there during the Cold War. From time to time, I will tell you a sea story. So, we're out at sea, off the coast of San Diego, just doing drills, doing stuff. Every now and then you have to cycle everything, keep it operational. And one of those things is shooting the torpedo tubes. You didn't have to actually shoot a torpedo. You could shoot what we called a water slug. That was basically you just filled the torpedo up with water and then cycled the ram. The ram is got seawater on one side, high pressure air on the other, and the air stored in this big flask. Basically a big upside down bottle. So we shoot off this water slug, and then we heard escaping air. So the O-ring in the bottom of this flask ruptured. Over time, O-rings will do that, and so it released all the air, and it would charge back up. It wouldn't fill back up with air, so you could shoot more. This was our starboard side set of torpedo tubes. So we stood the port side, but the starboard side were essentially broken. The captain decided, hey, we're a warship. We need to be ready. We're supposed to have the parts on board. Let's fix it. Well, we'd never really searched for the flask before. You could kind of see it between the tubes, but it was between a bulkhead and the tubes, and it's really hard to get to. We finally found how to get to it through a hatch. Yay big a hatch inside the bottom bunk in the 15-man stateroom. So in this little room, there's 15 bunks, and the bottom one over the left had this hatch. He pulled it out. Hey, guess what? There's this big bolt nut up on the bottom of a torpedo flask. Well, the nut's huge. We're like, well, what kind of wrench do you put on this? And one of our other guys says, I've seen this wrench. It's bolted up underneath the stoves of the torpedoes on the port side. I've never seen it. The only way to see it's if you're crawling in underneath all that stuff and looked up. And sure enough, we moved torpedoes. He crawled back there, and he comes back with this giant wrench. And sure enough, it fit this nut exactly. So, hey, we're on our way to success. Meanwhile, the storekeeper, who's in charge of everything on the boat, is supposed to keep all the supplies required. So there's like 2 or 3 of these O-rings. And there's O-rings for everything on the boat. Problem with the submarine is their lockers for all this stuff. Yay big lockers stuck in every corner of everywhere wherever there's space for storage locker, that's where all these things are. And he commenced right then to start looking for it. It wasn't, they didn't have a very good system at the time of knowing what was where. So, and we started to loosen up the bolt. Well, I got news for you. In a space this big and a wrench this big, you can't get a good bite. You had enough bite you could get and then turn it just the smallest of amounts. And then flip the wrench over and get it and turn it the smallest of amounts. And keep repeating that process for a very long time. And it never got to where, you break it loose and you could do it by hand. It never got there. So it was a wrench the entire way. And we took turns on it because it was hard to turn. And it was a couple of days. The captain kept asking, but the storekeeper hadn't found the parts either. And one time when it wasn't my turn to be wrenching, the couple others were, I'd go back to look for the storekeeper because, we're getting kind of far down the threads. We're hoping it comes loose at some point. And he was sitting up on top in the engine room, up on top of the steam generator in his locker. And he was just sitting up there about 10 feet up. And he opened the door and all this stuff went pouring out in his lap. He said, this is how it's been the entire time. A locker jam full of, basically baggies, but they were paper and they had O-rings in them. And then, so he finally came up, he found the part right about the same time, and we're talking 3 or 4 days, that we got the nut loose. And so we, greased it up, replaced the O-ring, pretty easy. Then came the problem. Submarine expands and contracts and expands and contracts and just does this over time. And, it's getting tighter. And then the pipes inside of that, which is what this is the big air pipe. It goes like this, and the flask is relatively stable. So the pipe's doing this number the whole time. And so as soon as we took off this nut, which is why it was hard to turn, the whole pipe went from the flask. And nothing we could do to get this back aligned up so we could get that nut started. We couldn't do anything. So we kind of felt kind of dumb, and captain wasn't happy. We came back in port as normal, our normal schedule, and we had to turn it over to the tender. Sub-tender does harder work, more. They can machine things, do all that kind of stuff. Well, they came down. They couldn't do anything with it either. They finally took off the entire wall where all the 3 bumps were, just moved them out, set them aside. And then they went and took chain hoists and pulled it this way, and then pulled it up, and then pulled it a third way. So they basically forced that pipe back into position with chain hoists, 3 of them, to where they could get and start the nut. And actually it went up pretty good, pretty far, and then they took the wrench and then he got it tight. But that was the only way they could get that thing back on. It was to take apart the wall and use 3 chain hoists to line it up correctly. So that's my sea story for today. Thanks for watching. Look at that sea. That's just awesome.